We got a disturbing story to tell you about out of St. Louis. 6 people have been missing for months, and police now believe they've been lured into an online cult.
Cults have long fascinated and horrified in equal measure, their methods to recruit and retain members being the subject of extensive study and depiction in media. Turn on any streaming service today, and chances are you're going to find a documentary about a cult sitting on the front page. These organizations, often characterized by their extreme ideologies and the charismatic leaders at their helm, employ a variety of tactics to attract and manipulate individuals. Our fascination with these strange, isolated communities and seductive allure of their gurus winds its way from morbid news stories to sensationalistic cinema. Charismatic leadership. Nearly every cult has a charismatic leader, who is often perceived by their followers as having access to higher knowledge or wisdom or connections to a divine power. They often paint a picture of a utopian future, promising followers that they're part of a movement that will achieve great things. They often possess an innate ability to attract attention and admiration, which makes them appear authoritative and trustworthy, which can make the cult's ideology seem more convincing. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, is a tragic real-life example. Jones was a compelling and persuasive speaker who delivered his messages with conviction. During a time of social turmoil in the United States, he described his vision for a utopian society, free from the injustices and troubles of the rest of the world.
Now will each of you, with a fond embrace, a salutary kiss of greeting to your neighbor, let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
His ability to speak to people's fears, needs, and desires led to just over 1,000 people following him to Jonestown, Guyana, where unfortunately many would never leave. Preaching about the revolutionary suicide as a means of protest against an oppressive societal system, he convinced over 900 of his followers to drink a cocktail of grape flavorade and 7 different chemicals, including cyanide, killing them all. This event is now known as the Jonestown Massacre. Several movies are inspired by or exploit the People's Temple. Umberto Lenzi's Eaten Alive took advantage of the Jonestown news coverage, releasing just 2 years after the Jonestown Massacre. It follows a woman named Sheila who is searching for her sister Diana, who has disappeared into the jungle. Unfortunately, she's joined the cult of Jonas, a sensationalized version of Jim Jones who murders and manipulates everyone he can. While the film focuses more on cannibalism than the cult itself, there are certainly parallels, including a mass suicide as the film enters prime exploitation mode in the third act. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. Cults often target individuals at vulnerable points in their lives, such as those experiencing loss, loneliness, or existential questioning. By offering community, answers, and a sense of purpose, cults can seem like attractive options to those feeling disconnected or disillusioned. Charles Manson exploited the vulnerabilities of young people in the 1960s, offering them a sense of belonging and purpose. His ability to manipulate his followers' desires and fears led to their involvement in a series of infamous murders. He targeted the disenfranchised, preying on runaways, dropouts, and those with troubled pasts, offering them what they desperately sought: family. By turning lonely hearts into loyal henchmen, he proved that all you need is love, with a dash of apocalyptic prophecy. He too was a charismatic leader, convincing his group that there was an imminent race war on the horizon called Helter Skelter, and after winning the war, they would inherit the earth under Manson's rule. While many films deal with Charles Manson, perhaps most notably Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and plenty have Manson-inspired figures like Josh Becker's 1985 film Thou Shalt Not Kill, except I'd like to highlight a smaller film that exhibits the exploitation of vulnerabilities, Sean Durkin's directorial debut, Martha Marcy May Marlene from 2011, a film that illustrates how cults can provide a false sense of family and purpose to manipulate and control someone in a more realistic, calculated way. It depicts a young woman named Martha, played magnificently by Elizabeth Olsen, and her entanglement with a cult that exploited her search for identity and belonging, along with her struggle to reassimilate into normal society after fleeing. While the cult leader, Patrick, shown through flashbacks, was not explicitly based on Manson, he created a sense of family among his followers, isolated them from the outside world, and promoted an us versus them mentality just like Charles Manson did. Isolation. Isolating members from their previous support systems, including family and friends, is a common tactic. This isolation not only makes it difficult for members to leave, but also reinforces dependency on the cult for social and emotional needs. Heaven's Gate is an example where members were isolated from the outside world, leading to their mass suicide in 1997. One of the factors the leaders, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, used was communal living. They lived together in a strict communal setting, which was often relocated to maintain secrecy and separation from the outside world. Members' lives became intertwined with the cult's activities, leaving little room for outside influences and relationships. They also encouraged and sometimes required members severing ties with family and friends. Letters, calls, and emails were all forbidden under the guise of spiritual purity and to allow more time to focus on the group's goals. Unfortunately, one of those goals was hitching a ride on the Hale-Bopp comet as a form of graduating from the human evolutionary level, and the way up was not pleasant. 39 people downed a mixture of phenobarbital mixed with applesauce or pudding and washed it down with vodka. Certainly not much of a last meal. While there aren't any major feature films based on Heaven's Gate, there are several that depict layers of isolation. Ty West's The Sacrament, which is inspired by the aforementioned Jonestown Massacre, shows a fictional cult called Eden Parish that isolates its members in a remote location. The film captures how isolation from the outside world can be used to control members and prevent dissent as a man tries to locate his sister, who has joined the reclusive convent. It delves into physical, psychological, and social isolation, depicting the control and manipulation cult leaders use, building narrative tension, and reflecting tactics used by cults like Heaven's Gate. Thought reform and behavioral control. Cults often employ psychological manipulation techniques to control members' thoughts and behaviors. This can include indoctrination sessions, public confessions, and the policing of thoughts to align with the cult's ideology. This is often achieved by controlling the environment, limiting members' access to information, and pushing black and white thought where the cult's beliefs are viewed as the absolute good, while anything that is outside of the cult is an absolute evil. While the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies, led by Sun Myung Moon, is well known for its mass wedding ceremonies and intense indoctrination camps, is also notorious for their systematic breakdown of individual thought through rigorous schedules, sleep deprivation, and indoctrination sessions. In Riley Stern's film Faults, a washed-up author reluctantly attempts to extract a young woman from a cult so that he can deprogram her from their ideology. The film delves into psychological manipulation tactics used by cults, including thought reform and behavioral control, highlighting the difficulty of breaking free from such influence. The film has strong performances by Leland Orser and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and as a bonus, the late, great Lance Reddick shines in a smaller role. Love bombing. Love bombing includes showering potential and new members with affection, attention, and praise. This tactic makes individuals feel special and valued, creating an emotional bond between the member and the group. It's particularly effective on those who feel neglected or undervalued in their personal lives. The Children of God, also known as Teens for Christ, the Family of Love, the Family, and now known as the Family International, used love bombing to attract new members, offering them an immediate sense of belonging and acceptance. This intense display of affection and community was hard to resist for many, especially those who felt alienated from society. The founder, David Berg, encouraged a tactic called flirty fishing, in which female members of the group were encouraged to use their sexuality to bring male members in, showing God's love to them through sexual activity. According to data from researcher Bill Bainbridge, over 223,000 people received God's gift of salvation as a result of flirty fishing between 1974 and 1987.
Dad, after all, we've strayed and yes, we've been bad. We're thankful for your love.
In Jane Campion's film Holy Smoke, a young woman played by Kate Winslet becomes involved with a cult while traveling in India, and her parents hatch a scheme to get her back. Upon her return, she is greeted with an intervention by a cult deprogramming specialist. The movie explores themes of influence, control, and the intense emotional manipulation tactics like love bombing used by cults to attract and retain members, which Ruth then uses on the specialist sent to deprogram her. Information control. Cults often control the flow of information within the group, restricting access to external sources of information that could contradict the group's teachings. This can include censoring news, limiting contact with non-members, and discouraging or forbidding the consumption of media that is critical of the cult. We've already mentioned this tactic with Heaven's Gate, but Scientology is another good example. This pseudo-religion has been accused of controlling information available to its members, including monitoring internet usage and discouraging the consumption of any media critical of Scientology practices or leadership. The Village, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, focuses on an isolated community that lives in fear of creatures in the surrounding woods. The elders of the village control information to maintain an idyllic yet fearful society. While not a cult in the traditional sense, the movie exemplifies how controlling information can manipulate and restrict the behavior of a community. Phobia induction. Cults often instill irrational fears or phobias tied to their cause or to the outside world, convincing members that they must do certain things to keep their cause alive, or that leaving the group would result in dire consequences, damnation, unhappiness, or in extreme cases, apocalypse. This tactic manipulates members into doing things or staying out of fear rather than loyalty or belief. The Jehovah's Witnesses have been criticized for using fear tactics by suggesting that those who leave the faith will be subject to eternal destruction, effectively ostracizing former members and creating a deep fear of leaving the community. Nothing keeps you loyal like the constant threat of Armageddon, God's means of destroying wickedness in the world, a divine judgment that will cleanse the earth of evil. Some of the films already mentioned, The Sacrament and The Village, delve into phobia induction. In the 1973 British horror film The Wicker Man, a pagan cult believes that they must perform human sacrifices for successful harvests, a ritual that has apocalyptic importance to that community. Similarly, the 2018 film Apostle continues that thread, requiring blood sacrifices to keep the island fertile. Rituals and commitment ceremonies. Rituals, oaths, and ceremonies can be used to solidify members' commitments to the cult. These practices often serve to deepen the bond between members and the group, making it psychologically harder to break away. The Order of the Solar Temple was a secret society that blended elements of Christian esotericism, UFO theories, and New Age philosophy. It involved its members in elaborate rituals and ceremonies that purported to offer spiritual advancement and salvation. These included complex initiations that symbolized death and rebirth, the use of regalia like elaborate robes and insignias that denoted ranks and roles, spiritual teachings, secret rituals designed to make others aspire to reach certain ranks, and unfortunately, mass suicides. In the 2017 film The Endless, there are several rituals depicted as two brothers return to a cult that they escaped from years before. The most striking is a rope ritual, where members of the community effectively play tug-of-war with an unseen force on the other end of the rope extending into the sky, a ritual that symbolizes a direct interaction with a mysterious force that the cult believes controls their fate. Another film that depicts these rituals and commitment ceremonies is Ari Aster's day-set nightmare, Midsommar. This horror film revolves around a group of friends who visit a remote Swedish village to attend a traditional midsummer festival. The visitors find themselves involved in the cult's increasingly bizarre and violent pagan rituals, which are used to solidify members' commitments to the cult. The film vividly depicts how rituals and ceremonies can be both alluring and manipulative. Disinformation and gaslighting. Cults may use disinformation and gaslighting to make members doubt their own perceptions and to discredit critics or defectors. By manipulating facts and reality, cult leaders can maintain control over their followers, even in the face of contradictory evidence.
Now, the world at large tends to tell one another, but I don't think individually any of them believe it, but they tell one another that man is an animal, and that man is only an animal, and that when he dies, he is gone.
NXIVM, a group that presented itself as a self-help organization, used gaslighting and manipulation to control and exploit members, including branding some women with the leader's initials. Former members have spoken out about the psychological manipulation and disinformation used to control them. Keith Raniere, the group's founder, would question members' interpretations of their own experiences, suggesting that any negative feelings or doubts were the results of personal flaws or ethical breaches. If a member recognized abusive behaviors or questioned NXIVM's teachings, leaders would turn the blame inward. They'd also use punishments and rewards as a system to enforce gaslighting. In the film The Sound of My Voice, we follow two documentary filmmakers who infiltrate a cult led by a woman claiming to be a time traveler from the future. The cult uses disinformation and gaslighting to maintain control over its members, creating a complex narrative that makes it difficult for members and outsiders alike to discern the truth. The film explores the psychological impact of these tactics on individuals' perceptions and beliefs, including our protagonists. The tactics used by cults to gain and retain members are varied and complex, often tailored to exploit human psychology and societal vulnerabilities. From love bombing to financial exploitation, information control, and the induction of phobias, these strategies reveal the lengths to which cult leaders will go to maintain control over their followers. Understanding these tactics is crucial for recognizing and combating the influence of cults in society. While the presence of cults in film are often exploited for our amusement, through the lens of cinema, viewers can gain insights into the tactics used by cults to control and exploit their members, highlighting the importance of critical thinking and awareness of manipulative practices.
But before you go, we just want you to know, oh Dad, we're gonna